I still remember the day of my daughter's wedding as if it were carved into my skin. The kind of memory you don't simply recall, you relive it, whether you want to or not. Every detail, every glance, every whispered word that carried more cruelty than a shout. And yet, when people ask me about that day, I hesitate to answer. Because how do you explain that the happiest day of your child's life was also the loneliest and coldest day of your own? The church bells rang that morning, clear and bright, echoing across the small Italian town where I have lived all my life. I had woken up before dawn, unable to sleep, my heart racing with both pride and a knot of unease I couldn't untangle. My daughter Sophia was getting married. She was 28, brilliant, beautiful, the kind of young woman who drew every eye when she walked into a room. I raised her mostly alone after her father left us when she was still a teenager, and every dream I ever had was somehow tied to her. I ironed my dress the night before, a soft navy blue, chosen carefully so as not to outshine her. I had put aside money for months just to buy the shoes that would match, simple but elegant, because I wanted her to feel proud of me when her new family looked at me. I wanted them to see that I wasn't some tired, forgotten woman from a small town. I was her mother, the woman who gave everything to put her where she was now. When I arrived at the church, the air was crisp, colder than usual for late September. The steps were covered with white petals, scattered by children who ran about laughing. I held a small clutch, inside of which I had carefully folded a letter I had written to Sophia, just in case I couldn't bring myself to speak to her. Was full of things I never told her: how scared I was the day her father left, how proud I was of every achievement she had ever earned, how much I loved her even when she pushed me away in those difficult years. I thought maybe after the ceremony, when she had a moment alone, I could slip it into her hand, but the moment I entered the churchyard, I knew something was wrong. People looked at me strangely, a mix of pity and discomfort, as if they knew a joke I wasn't part of. An usher, a young man I had never met before, smiled tightly at me and asked for my name. I gave it to him, thinking it was routine, and he checked a small list before his face softened in a way that felt patronizing. "Madam," he said in a low voice, "your seat is just outside, under the canopy." I frowned. "Outside? Surely, there's a mistake. I'm the bride's mother." He looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "These were the instructions, Signora. The family made it clear." I felt my face burn. My daughter's wedding, and they had placed me outside, away from the music, away from the vows, away from the place where every mother dreams of sitting when her daughter walks down the aisle. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to smile. Politely, I walked toward the canopy, which was really just a flimsy tent at the side of the church. There were a few chairs set up, half empty, and the wind cut straight through the fabric, carrying with it the smell of damp earth. From where I sat, I couldn't even see the altar clearly. I saw flashes of white Sophia's gown gliding past, the back of her head crowned with a veil. I heard laughter, music, vows spoken too faintly for me to catch. Every cheer from inside the church felt like a nail hammered into my chest. I clutched the letter in my clutch, my hand trembling, wondering if this was truly happening or if I had stepped into a nightmare. I couldn't wake from doubt, and then I saw it. At the entrance of the church, just above the door, they had hung a framed photograph of me. It was a picture from years ago, one I barely remembered being taken. Underneath, in bold letters, were the words, "No entry allowed." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at it, my vision blurring, the world tilting. It wasn't just exclusion. It was humiliation, deliberate and cruel. My daughter's fiancé Marco came from a wealthy family, and I had always sensed they disapproved of me. I was too simple, too provincial for their standards. But to see my own picture hung as a warning sign, it was beyond cruelty. It was an erasure of my dignity. Guests walked past it without protest, some glancing at me with embarrassment, others ignoring me completely. No one said a word in my defense. Not one. I sat there in silence, my chest tight, as the ceremony unfolded. Without me, flashbacks flooded me as I sat under that canopy, shivering. I remembered Sophia as a little girl, running barefoot through the vineyard behind our house, her laughter brighter than the summer sun. I remembered the nights I stayed awake sewing clothes for her so she wouldn't feel poor among her classmates. I remembered how, when she was 17, she came home crying because her father had promised to attend her school recital but never showed up. I had held her all night, whispering promises that I would never abandon her. And yet, here I was, abandoned, not by him this time, but by her. I wondered what lies she had been told, what stories Marco's family had whispered in her ear to turn her against me, or worse, what truths she might believe about me that I never had the chance to correct. I clenched the letter inside my clutch. My heart screamed to stand up, to march into the church, to tear down that hateful photograph and demand my place beside my daughter, but my body betrayed me. I stayed seated, frozen, afraid that if I moved, I would collapse entirely. When the ceremony ended, people poured out of the church, their faces glowing with joy. Sophia emerged, radiant in her white dress, Marco beside her, like a prince in his tailored suit. The crowd applauded. Rice was thrown, cameras flashed, and me, I was a shadow, standing in the cold. My own daughter's happiness unfolding as if I didn't exist. For a brief moment, her eyes met mine. Just a flicker, a second, no longer than the beat of a heart. Her smile faltered, just slightly, before she looked away. She didn't come to me, didn't call me, didn't offer even a small acknowledgement. The reception followed in a grand hall, a villa owned by Marco's family. I considered not going, disappearing into the night to lick my wounds alone, but something inside me whispered that if I left, I would be surrendering entirely. I owed it to myself to show up, even if I was nothing more than a ghost at their feast. The hall glittered with chandeliers and laughter. Long tables groaned under the weight of food and wine. I entered quietly, unnoticed, and found a seat near the back. Every toast, every speech, was a reminder of what I wasn't allowed to be. When Marco's father stood and praised the union of two perfect families, I nearly choked on my wine. Perfect families, as if mine didn't exist. As the night wore on, I overheard fragments of conversations I wasn't meant to hear. It was for the best, someone said. She would have ruined the photographs. Another voice laughed softly. At least she didn't cause a scene. That would have been worse. I sat there, smiling politely when anyone's eyes landed on me, but inside I was crumbling. Each word was a stone added to the weight already crushing my chest. And then came the moment I can never forget. During the dance, when the floor was full of swirling gowns and polished shoes, Marco's mother approached me. She leaned down, her perfume thick and suffocating, and whispered in my ear, "You should be grateful we allowed you to come at all." I froze, her words slicing deeper than the cold ever could. She walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I realized then that this wasn't just about Sophia being distant or Marco being proud. It was orchestrated, planned, a systematic erasure of me from her life, executed with precision and cruelty. And the worst part, the part that twisted the knife, was that my daughter had allowed it. I excused myself from the hall and stepped outside into the night air. The sky was scattered with stars, but I couldn't see them through my tears. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the letter, the words I had written so carefully trembling in my hands. I thought about leaving it for her, slipping it into her bag or her bouquet. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps it was despair. I folded it again and tucked it back. That night, I walked home alone through the quiet streets of our town. The laughter and music from the villa faded behind me until all I could hear was the sound of my own footsteps. I didn't cry until I reached my door, until I was safe inside the emptiness of my little house. And when I did, it was the kind of crying that breaks a body, not just a heart. Even now, years later, I wonder what people thought when they saw me there. Seated outside in the cold, humiliated and ignored. Did they think I deserved it? Did they think I had failed as a mother? Or did they simply look away because it was easier than facing the cruelty unfolding before their eyes? What I know for certain is this: that day marked the beginning of a truth I had long feared to face. My daughter was no longer mine. She belonged to another family now. And in their world, I was nothing but an inconvenience to be hidden away. But what they didn't know, what even Sophia didn't know, was that secrets have a way of surfacing, and the secret I would uncover later would change everything. The morning after the wedding, the silence in my house felt heavier than any sound. I had left the dress I wore draped over a chair, its navy fabric now wrinkled and lifeless, and the shoes stood neatly by the door, as if waiting for another chance that would never come. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the folded letter that I still hadn't given Sophia. It felt like a relic from another life, a message written for a daughter who no longer existed in the way I remembered her. I tried to convince myself that perhaps it was just the wedding nerves, that she had been swept away by the glamour of Marco's family, by the grand gestures and the suffocating expectations they carried like fine china. Maybe she would call me in a day or two, explain, apologize, tell me she had not realized how far things had gone. But as the hours turned into days, and the days into weeks, the phone never rang, not once. The townspeople whispered. They always do. In a small place like ours, every wound is public, every humiliation a piece of entertainment. For someone else, I caught them in the bakery, their voices low but not low enough. Did you hear? They didn't even let her sit inside. Another voice chimed in. Perhaps there is more to it. Families don't do such things without reason. That one stung the most. Without reason. As if cruelty must have a justification. As if I must have done something so terrible that my daughter chose to erase me. I went about my days in silence. Working in the little library where I had been employed for years, the shelves became my refuge, the smell of old paper and dust more comforting than human voices. Children came in after school, their laughter echoing between the aisles, and I wondered if their mothers sat proudly at their concerts, their birthdays, their milestones. I wondered if those mothers knew how lucky they were. Then, one evening, when the sky outside turned a deep violet and the streets emptied of chatter, I locked the library door and found a figure waiting by the gate. It was Clara, an old neighbor, her face etched with lines of both kindness and curiosity. She hesitated before speaking, as if weighing whether her words would wound me. "Alina," she said softly, "I thought you should know. Your ex was at the wedding." The words knocked the breath out of me. For a moment I thought I had misheard, that the loneliness in my mind was making up stories to torment me. But Clara's eyes, sympathetic and searching, told me she was telling the truth. "He was there," I whispered. She nodded. "Not in the church, but at the reception. I saw him standing near Marco's parents. They looked familiar with him." My chest tightened, my pulse pounding in my ears. I hadn't seen Luca in over 15 years. He had left me with nothing but unpaid bills and Sophia's tears, chasing after a younger woman in another city. For years, I had shielded Sophia from the ugliest truths about him, softening his betrayal because I couldn't bear for her to carry the full weight of his abandonment. And now, after all this time, he had reappeared like a ghost, stepping into her life when I had been pushed out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every memory of Luca flooding back with a bitterness that tasted of iron. I remembered the nights he came home drunk, the mornings he left, without a word, the promises he broke as easily as glass. I remembered Sophia waiting by the window for him, her small hands clutching the curtains, her eyes wide with hope that never lasted beyond nightfall. And I remembered holding her when she finally understood he was gone for good, her sobs soaking my blouse until I thought my heart would collapse under the weight of it. If he was back, if he had aligned himself with Marco's family, then everything began to make sense. The sudden distance from Sophia, the cold glances, the decision to place me outside. Luca had always been skilled with words, with twisting stories, until he was the hero of his own betrayals. What lies had he told her? What version of me had he painted in her mind? I decided I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to see Sophia, to look into her eyes and demand the truth. I rehearsed the words over and over, pacing my kitchen, clutching the letter I had written. I told myself I would remain calm, that I would not beg, that I would not let them see me broken again. A week later, I went to her new home. It was a villa outside the town, gifted by Marco's parents, its walls gleaming white, its windows framed by perfectly trimmed hedges. I stood at the gate, my hands trembling, my heart hammering. I rang the bell, the sound echoing in the still air. Sophia opened the door herself. For a moment, her face softened when she saw me, as if the daughter I once knew flickered through her eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by a mask of control. "Mama," she said, her voice polite but distant. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed hard. "I came to see you, to talk." "Please, Sophia, just a few minutes." She hesitated, glancing behind her as if afraid someone might see. Then she stepped outside, closing the door behind her. We stood on the stone path, the air heavy between us. "I don't know what you've been told," I began, my voice trembling despite my resolve, "but I need you to remember who I am. I raised you. I was there when no one else was. Whatever they've said, whatever he has said." She cut me off sharply. This isn't about what anyone has said. This is about what you've done. Her words struck me like a slap. What I've done, Sophia? I gave everything for you. I worked 2 jobs. I went without meals so you could eat. What did I do to deserve being humiliated at your wedding? To see my face hanging at the church doors like a warning, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked away, her voice lower now. You don't understand. You never did. You kept things from me. You lied. You made me believe things that weren't true. Papa told me everything. I felt the blood drain from my face. Papa, you've spoken to him? She nodded, her eyes still averted. He told me how you pushed him away, how you made it impossible for him to stay, how you turned me against him with your bitterness. My knees weakened. The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. That's not true, I whispered. He left us. He chose another life, another woman. He abandoned us both. Her eyes finally met mine, but they were cold, filled with a hurt that had hardened into anger. That's not how he tells it. He said you never wanted him to be part of my life, that you made sure I saw only the worst of him. I shook my head violently, tears blurring my vision. No, Sophia, I shielded you. I hid the worst of him so you wouldn't hate him. I carried it alone because I wanted you to have some love for your father, even when he didn't deserve it. But she didn't believe me. I saw it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her arms folded across her chest like a barrier. She had already chosen her truth, and it wasn't mine. Please, I begged softly, my voice breaking. Don't let him rewrite our story. Don't let him take you away from me. She shook her head. It's too late, Mama. Things have already changed. The door behind her opened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of Marco's mother, her eyes sharp and watchful. Sophia turned, then looked back at me with finality. I think you should go now, she said. The words cut deeper than any knife. I wanted to scream, to grab her, to make her remember. But instead, I nodded slowly, my body numb. I turned and walked away, my feet heavy on the stone path, the sound of the door closing behind me echoing like the slam of a coffin. That night, I sat in my kitchen again, the letter unfolded before me, my tears falling onto the paper and smudging. The ink, the words I had written felt useless now, fragile against the fortress of lies that had been built around her. But somewhere deep inside, a flame began to burn, a small, fragile fire of resolve. If Luca had poisoned her against me, then I would not rest until the truth was known. He thought he could return after years of absence and erase my sacrifices, my love, my motherhood with a few words whispered into her ear. He thought wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this. I would uncover the truth. I would bring to light what he had hidden. And maybe my daughter would see me again for who I truly was. The days after that conversation with Sophia became some of the loneliest of my life. I moved through my routines as though I were underwater, everything muffled and heavy, as if the world had dimmed its light and sound just for me. At the library, I found myself staring at the same page of a book for hours without reading a single word. At home, I cooked meals I barely touched, leaving them half-finished on the counter before scraping them into the bin. Even the small comforts I used to hold on to, the rhythm of sweeping the floors, the soft hum of the kettle, felt stripped of their meaning. But under that heavy grief, something else stirred, a stubbornness. The more I thought about Luca, about his smug presence at the wedding and the poison he had poured into Sophia's ears, the more a kind of fire began to crackle in my chest. For so many years I had carried the shame of being left behind, of raising a child alone, of facing whispers in the market and judgment from neighbors who thought a woman without a husband was less than whole. I had never fought back. I had always taken the blows silently, but this was different. This was not only about MIT, was about Sophia, about the truth of our lives together, about protecting her from the illusions of a man who had never deserved her love. One evening, I found myself pulling out an old box from the top of my wardrobe. It was heavy with papers I hadn't touched in years, bills, receipts, photographs, letters, relics from a life that felt buried. I sat at the table and began to sift through them, my fingers trembling as I unfolded yellowed sheets of paper. And there it was, the letter Luca had written me the day he left. I hadn't looked at it since that morning, years ago, when I found it on the kitchen counter beside an empty coffee cup. His words were burned into me, even without reading them again, but I forced myself to unfold the page and stare at his handwriting. Alina, you know I cannot stay. You've made this house unbearable. Your bitterness, your demands. I need to live a life of freedom, not chained by your suffocating love. Don't try to stop me. Sophia will be better off without us constantly fighting. I remembered the sting of those words, the way they twisted the truth, placing the blame on me. I had been the one working double shifts, patching his mistakes, trying to hold together a house that was already collapsing under the weight of his betrayals. But to anyone who read this, it was I who had driven him away. I thought about Sophia reading something like this, about Luca showing her selective pieces of the past, crafting a story where he was the victim and I was the villain. The idea made me sick, and yet I knew I needed more than my own word against his lies. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that would pierce through the fog he had cast around her. In the weeks that followed, I began to trace his shadow. I asked discreet questions in town, careful not to appear desperate, but people talk. I learned that he had been staying in a nearby city for several years, working for one of Marco's family businesses. That explained their closeness, the familiarity Clara had noticed at the reception. He hadn't just reappeared out of nowhere, he had been woven back into Sophia's life slowly, strategically, probably long before I had even realized. The betrayal deepened in my mind. Marco's family knew. They had welcomed him, perhaps even encouraged him, because his version of history served their purpose. To them, I was an inconvenience, a mother from a modest background, unpolished, too ordinary for their polished world. But Luca, they could shape him into something else. A man with flaws, yes, but a man they could elevate, forgive, integrate into their narrative. That the thought of it made me sick. Then one afternoon at the library, I stumbled across something I had forgotten, a shoebox of old photographs that had been donated by a local family. I was sorting through them for cataloging when I found a small bundle of papers tucked between the albums. They weren't from the donation. I realized with the start they were my own, misplaced years ago when I had briefly stored some of my belongings at the library during renovations. My hands shook as I opened them, recognizing receipts, bank statements, and finally, tucked at the bottom, a series of letters. These letters were from Luca, not to me, but to another woman. They were dated during the years we were still married. My heart pounded as I read them, his handwriting pouring out declarations of love, promises of a future, confessions that left no doubt he had been unfaithful long before he ever left. One letter in particular stopped me cold. It was dated only 3 months before he walked out. He wrote of using my money to take her on trips, of how he would soon be free of the burden of Alina and her endless nagging. My hands trembled, the paper crumpling in my fists. Here was proof. Proof that he had lied, not just to me but to Sophia. Proof that he had left us for someone else, that I had not pushed him away but had been discarded for his own selfish desires. For a long time, I just sat there in the quiet library, staring at the letters. They were like knives, reopening old wounds, but at the same time, they were a weapon. With these, I could fight back. I could show Sophia the truth. That night, I barely slept. I paced the house, rehearsing in my head how I would confront her. Should I go to her home again? Should I send the letters in an envelope? Should I wait for a moment when she was alone, away from Marco and his mother's poisonous influence? Every option felt dangerous. If I pushed too hard, she might close the door on me forever. But if I did nothing, Luca's lies would become permanent, cemented into her heart until I was nothing more than a bitter footnote in her life. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, I saw Sophia in town. She was leaving a boutique, her hair perfectly styled, her face glowing with the kind of happiness that once would have made me proud. But now, I wondered how much of that glow was real and how much was a mask. She saw me before I could hide. Our eyes met, and for a second, I thought she would turn away. But to my surprise, she walked toward me. "Mama," she said, her voice stiff. "We need to talk." I nodded, my throat dry. We walked together in silence until we reached a small cafe at the edge of the piazza. We sat across from each other, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. "I know you're hurt," she began. "I know the wedding wasn't what you expected. But you have to understand, things are different now. I'm part of a new family, and they have certain standards. Standards," I repeated, my voice sharp. "Standards that require humiliating your own mother, that require hanging my photograph like I was a criminal." Her cheeks flushed. She looked down at her hands. "It wasn't meant to be like that. It was just complicated." I leaned forward, my voice trembling but steady. "And what about your father? Did he tell you why he really left? Did he tell you about the other woman? About the money he stole from us? Did he show you these? I pulled the bundle of letters from my bag and laid them on the table. Sophia's eyes widened. She hesitated, then reached for them. As she read, I watched her face shift confusion, disbelief, then a flicker of something deeper. Her hands shook as she turned the pages, her lips pressed into a tight line. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes glassy. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Because you were a child," I said softly. "Because I didn't want to destroy the image of your father you held on to. I thought protecting you from the truth was an act of love. I carried it alone so you wouldn't have to." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, as if ashamed to let them fall. He told me you pushed him away, that you poisoned me against him. I believed him." The words broke something in me, but they also healed something else. For the first time, I saw doubt in her eyes, cracks in the wall he had built between us. But before I could speak, a shadow fell across our table. I looked up to see him, Luca, standing there, his face older, heavier, but his eyes the same as they had always been. "Cold, calculating, Alina," he said, his voice smooth, still clinging to the past. "I see." Sophia froze, caught between us, her eyes darting from him to me. My heart pounded, but I stood my ground. "This isn't the past, Luca," I said, my voice steady. "This is the truth. And it's time Sophia knew all of it." The air around us thickened the moment Luca spoke. His presence seemed to drain all warmth from the little cafe, the hum of conversation fading until it felt like every eye was watching us. Sophia's hand lingered over the letters, trembling, slightly, as though she were unsure whether to shield them or shove them away. I hadn't seen him this close in more than 20 years. And yet my body reacted as though no time had passed, at all, the same tightening in my chest, the same instinct to flinch from his shadow. But I didn't. I kept my back straight and my eyes locked on him. "What are you doing here?" I asked sharply, though the question sounded feeble even to me. He belonged here now, at least in Sophia's life. He was stitched into it carefully and deliberately, like a parasite that had worked its way back into its host. "I came to check on my daughter," he said smoothly, his lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Imagine my surprise when I find her sitting with you being fed more of your venom." Sophia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted between us, her mind clearly torn between the letters in front of her and the man towering over us. "These aren't venom," I said, my voice trembling but firm. I tapped the stack of papers. "These are your words, Luca. Your promises to another woman. Your confession of theft. Or do you deny writing them?" He chuckled, a sound that chilled me. "Do you really think a few old scraps of paper prove anything? I was a foolish man once. Yes, I made mistakes. But that doesn't change the truth. You were bitter, controlling, suffocating. I had no choice but to leave." I felt the blood rush to my face. "No choice. You had every choice. You chose her over us. You chose your own freedom over your daughter. And now you stand here, pretending it was me who pushed you out." "Enough," Sophia said suddenly, her voice sharp. She pushed the letters back toward me as though they burned her fingers. "I don't know who to believe. All my life I've lived with one version of this story, yours, Mama. And now, suddenly, I see another side. I don't know what's real anymore." My heart cracked at her words, but I couldn't blame her. For years, I had kept the truth buried, hoping to protect her. Now, that silence was being used against me. Luca leaned closer to her, his voice lowering into something almost tender. "Sophia, you know me. You've seen me these past years, how I've tried to be here for you. Don't let her poison you against me again." I saw it then, the way he touched her shoulder lightly, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. He wasn't only trying to reclaim her as a daughter. He was trying to rewrite himself entirely, to slip into the role of savior after years of being nothing but a deserter, and worse. I could see Sophia wavering. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until finally she stood up. Her chair scraped against the tiled floor with a harsh screech. "I can't do this here," she whispered. "Not now. I need time." She hurried out of the cafe, leaving me with Luca. He slid into her empty seat, as though this had been his plan all along. "You'll never win, Alina," he said calmly. "You had your chance to raise her, and you poisoned her with your bitterness. Now, it's my turn. She's mine again. She's not an object you can claim," I hissed. He smirked, You still don't understand, do you? You were always too small, too provincial, too plain to see how the world works. With Marco's family by my side, Sophia doesn't need you anymore. She'll see that soon enough. Something inside me snapped. For years, I had swallowed my rage, my humiliation, my grief. I had let it eat me alive in silence, but in that moment, I felt the fire rise in me like never before. You may have money, you may have influence, but you don't have the truth, and I will make sure she sees it. Luca, every ugly piece of it. She may doubt me now, but one day, she understands, and when she does, she'll walk away from you, just like she should have 20 years ago. His jaw tightened, the smugness flickering for a moment. Then he leaned back, folding his arms. We'll see. That night, I collapsed into bed, exhausted but determined. I knew the battle ahead would not be short or easy. Sophia was entangled not only in Luca's lies, but in the wealth and power of Marco's family. They had built a golden cage around her, one that looked beautiful but held her prisoner just the same. To free her, I needed more than letters. I needed undeniable proofs, something that even Luca couldn't twist or dismiss. So I began to dig deeper. The weeks that followed turned me into a detective of my own past. I searched through old financial records, contacted people who had once known Luca, traced whispers of his business dealings. It was Clara, my friend, who uncovered the first thread. One evening, she arrived at my house with a small folder of documents. I did some asking around, she said. A friend of mine works in City Hall. She pulled these for me. Inside, the folder were property records, several small apartments purchased under Luca's name during the years after he left us. But they weren't empty investments. Each was linked to women, different names, different addresses, a trail of deceit spanning decades. As I flipped through the documents, a sick realization settled over me. Luca hadn't simply abandoned us. For one woman, he had lived like a phantom, drifting from place to place, stringing along anyone who would give him shelter, money, or affection. He was a man who consumed and discarded without shame. This, I whispered, this is what Sophia needs to see. But I hesitated. Throwing all of this at her at once might crush her. She had already spent years building a fragile image of her father in her mind. To shatter it entirely could break her heart. Yet what choice did I have? Every day she spent in his orbit, the harder it would be for her to escape. The decision was made for me sooner than expected. One evening, as I walked home from the library, I saw a familiar figure standing by my gate. Sophia. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. Mama, she whispered as I approached. Can we talk? I brought her inside, my heart pounding. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. I asked Papa about the letters. She said quietly, he told me they were fakes, that you forged them to turn me against him. The words stung, but I had expected them. And do you believe him? I asked softly. She hesitated. I don't know. I want to believe you. But he makes me feel like he cares, like he wants to make up for everything. And you've always been so angry, so guarded. Sometimes it's hard to feel your love, even if I know it's there. Her honesty pierced me. I reached across the table and took her hands. Sophia, I was angry because I carried the weight of everything alone. But my love for you has never wavered. Everything I did to protect you. If you give me a chance, I'll prove it. I pulled out Clara's folder and laid it before her. These are official records. They can't be forged. Look at them. See for yourself who your father really is. She opened the folder with trembling hands. As her eyes scanned the documents, tears spilled down her cheeks. All these years, she whispered, he wasn't just gone. He was living this double life. I held her as she cried, my own tears mixing with hers. For the first time in years, I felt a small crack in the wall between us. But before relief could settle, Sophia pulled away, her expression troubled. Mama, you don't understand. Marco's family, they trust him. They've given him a position in the company. If this comes out, it won't just destroy him. It'll destroy Marco too. His parents will never forgive me for bringing this shame into their world. Her words chilled me. The battle wasn't just against Luca. It was against the entire structure of power that held Sophia captive. Exposing him would mean risking her marriage, her stability, her entire future. And yet, could she truly build a life on lies? As I watched her wrestle with the choice, I knew the fight was only beginning. Luca was cunning. Marco's family was powerful. And the truth, though I held it in my hands, was a fragile weapon against such forces. But for the first time, I also knew I wasn't alone. Sophia had seen the cracks, and through those cracks, maybe, just maybe, the light of truth could finally pour in. The following days felt like walking through shifting sand. Sophia had the folder of documents. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, and yet I could sense her hesitation. She carried the weight of two worlds on her shoulders, the truth of her father's betrayal and the looming power of her husband's family. Every time I saw her, her face was pale, her words careful, as though any wrong move might cause everything to collapse. Then, one evening, the collapse began. I was washing dishes when the phone rang. Sophia's voice trembled on the other end. "Mama, can I come over? It's urgent." Minutes later, she arrived, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched her handbag like it was a shield. "They know," she whispered the moment she stepped inside. "Marco's parents. Papa told them everything. He said you're trying to ruin him, to ruin me, to ruin our family." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean they know? Did he tell them about the documents?" "Yes," she said, collapsing onto the chair. "But he twisted it. He said you forged them, that you're jealous of his success, of my marriage, that you want me to turn against him so you can have me all to yourself." I sank into the chair opposite her, my hands trembling. Of course, Luca would twist the truth. It was what he did best. But what terrified me more was that Marco's family believed him. "What did Marco say?" I asked quietly. Sophia's lips quivered. He told me I have to choose. Either I cut ties with you completely, or I risk losing everything, my marriage, my home, my place in his family. His parents said they won't tolerate this drama. They said I have to prove where my loyalty lies. The words pierced me deeper than any knife. I had feared this moment, but hearing it aloud was unbearable. They weren't just demanding my daughter's loyalty, they were demanding her silence, her surrender to their power. Tears burned my eyes, but I forced myself to stay strong. "And what do you want, Sophia? What does your heart tell you?" She looked at me helplessly, torn apart by forces larger than herself. "I don't know. I want both of you. I want peace. But it feels like no matter what I do, I'll lose someone." The room was heavy with her pain, and I realized then that my fight wasn't just against Luca. It was against an entire family determined to erase me from my daughter's life. The very next day, I received an unexpected visitor, Marco's mother, Signora Bellini. She arrived in a sleek black car, dressed impeccably, her expression carved from stone. She stepped into my modest home as though it were beneath her, glancing around with thinly veiled disdain. "Let's not waste time," she said, sitting down uninvited. "You've caused enough trouble. My son has worked hard to give Sophia the life she deserves. We will not allow your bitterness to destroy it." I clenched my fists. The only one destroying lives is Luca. He abandoned us. He lied. He cheated. Shouldn't Sophia know the truth? Her eyes narrowed. "Truth is a luxury, Signora. Stability is what matters. My son's reputation, our family's business, these are worth more than your personal grievances. If you love your daughter, you will step aside and let her live in peace." "Peace built on lies is no peace at all," I said, my voice trembling with fury. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Do you know what happens to people who stand in the way of families like ours? They are left with nothing. You already have very little. Don't risk losing even that." Her words were a threat, clear and deliberate, and though fear clawed at my chest, I met her gaze without blinking. "You can threaten me all you want, but I will not abandon my daughter to him. Not again." She stood, smoothing her dress, her expression unshaken. "Then you've made your choice, and so will Sophia." When she left, I felt the walls of my small home closing in on me. I was up against something bigger than I had ever faced. This wasn't just Luca's manipulation anymore, it was a war against a dynasty. A family that saw me as a stain on their perfect image. But I couldn't let them win. That night, I went to Clara, my trusted friend, and told her everything. She listened quietly, her brow furrowed. Then she placed her hand on mine. "Elena, you need to fight fire with fire. If they want to silence you, you must make your voice louder. Don't just show Sophia the truth, show everyone." Her words struck something inside me. For years, I had lived in shadows, ashamed of my past, afraid of stirring scandal. But now, I realized silence only served those who thrived on lies, so I began to prepare. I gathered every piece of evidence I had: letters, documents, testimonies from people who had known Luca. I contacted a journalist Clara trusted, someone who had spent years exposing corruption in high society. He agreed to meet with me, intrigued by the story of a man who had built his way into a powerful family on a foundation of deceit. But before I could move forward, disaster struck. One evening, as I returned home from the market, I found my front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. Drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor. My small house had been ransacked, and when I rushed to the drawer where I kept the documents, my worst fear was confirmed: they were gone. The folder Clara had given me, the proof I had collected, everything had vanished. I sank to the floor, shaking, tears streaming down my face. They had silenced me before I could even speak. But as I sat there in despair, I remembered something. Weeks earlier, I had made copies, dozens of them, hidden away in a safe place Clara didn't even know about. I hadn't trusted myself not to lose them, and for once, my paranoia had saved me. Wiping my tears, I stood. If they thought they could intimidate me, they were wrong. I still had the truth, and I still had my voice. The next day, I called the journalist. "I'm ready," I told him. "It's time the world knows who Luca really is." But even as I said the words, a pang of fear gripped me. Once the story was out, there would be no going back. Luca would retaliate. Marco's family would come after me with everything they had. And Sofia, she would be caught in the storm. Night, as I sat by the window, staring at the flickering streetlights, I wondered if I was about to save my daughter or lose her forever. The storm did not wait. It came crashing down almost immediately after Sofia chose to stand by me. At first, it was subtle, hushed whispers in the marketplace, neighbors looking at me with pity or worse, suspicion. Then it became undeniable. A woman I had known for years avoided me in the bakery, her eyes sliding past as though I were invisible. At the pharmacy, the clerk who had always greeted me with warmth now handed me my medicine with a stiff, polite silence. The rumors spread quickly, poisoning everything. "Did you hear? Alina tried to blackmail her ex-husband. They say she forged documents." Imagine accusing her own daughter's father, just for revenge. I didn't need to guess where it came from. Luca. He had always been skilled at turning stories to his advantage. Now, with Marco's resources and his new wealthy connections, he had an audience eager to believe the worst of me. After all, what is easier to digest? That a charming man who had returned to rebuild his family was innocent, or that his bitter ex-wife was trying to destroy him out of spite? The worst part wasn't the whispers. It was watching Sofia struggle under their weight. She had stood strong the first week, holding her head high, but slowly, cracks appeared. She would flinch when her phone buzzed, hesitate before opening messages. One evening, when she came to my house, I caught sight of the screen. It was Marco. "You're letting her poison you. If you don't cut ties now, I can't protect you." I could see the exhaustion in her face. She was caught between two worlds, each pulling her apart. One night, she broke down completely. "Mama, I can't do this," she cried, pacing the living room. "Marco says the board is worried. His mother barely speaks to me. They look at me like I'm tainted. And then Papa, he keeps calling, saying you've twisted me against him. I don't know who to believe anymore." Her words pierced me. For a moment, I felt an almost unbearable wave of guilt. Had I asked too much of her? Had I dragged her into a war she was too fragile to fight? But then, I looked at her, my daughter, trembling and torn, and I knew that silence would not save her. Silence is what had allowed Luca to disappear, to return, to lie unchecked for so long. I took her hands firmly. "Sofia, you do know who to believe. You've seen the documents. You've heard his excuses. You've lived through the years he was gone. You don't need me to tell you what's true. You've always known." Her lips trembled. "But if I stand with you, I'll lose Marco. I'll lose my home." I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. "Then you must ask yourself this. Is a home worth more than your soul? Is a marriage built on fear worth saving? My darling, I lost myself once when I stayed silent. I will not let you lose yourself too." She collapsed into my arms, her sobs muffled against my shoulder. I held her tightly, though my own body shook with fear of what was to come. The breaking point arrived not long after. Luca called a meeting at the town hall. It was presented as a charitable event, but in truth it was a stage where he could perform his redemption, and I would be cast as the villain. I almost didn't go. I thought, let them have their lies. I will stay away. But then, I saw Sophia's face, pale and strained, as she told me Marco expected her there. She needed me not as a spectator, but as her anchor, so I went. The hall was crowded, filled with townsfolk, business partners, and the Rinaldi family, in their polished finery. Luca stood at the front, radiant in his confidence, shaking hands, smiling that same smile that had once charmed me into forgetting my doubts. When the speeches began, he stepped forward, his voice rich and theatrical. "My friends," he began, "I stand before you humbled. Years ago, I made mistakes. I was young, foolish, chasing dreams abroad, but I returned to make amends, to be a father again, to build something lasting for this community." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. He continued, his tone darkening. "Yet, as I try to rebuild, there are those who would rather destroy. Lies have been spread, false documents waved about as weapons. And who is behind it?" He paused dramatically. "My ex-wife Elena, a woman so consumed by resentment that she would rather see her own daughter suffer than let go of the past." All eyes turned to me, some pitiful, some sharp with judgment. My throat burned. Sophia, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand. Her eyes begged me not to crumble. I stood, my voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as I spoke. "You speak of mistakes, Luca, but these are not mistakes, they are choices. Choices to abandon your family, to take money that wasn't yours, to deceive everyone who trusted you." Gasps murmured through the hall. Luca's eyes narrowed, but I pressed on. "I did not forge those documents. I kept them, hidden for years, not to destroy you, but to protect my daughter from the shame of knowing what kind of man her father was. But now, you've forced this into the light. And if anyone here doubts me..." I pulled the folder from my bag, my hands trembling as I held it high. "Then let them read for themselves." For a moment, silence. Then voices rose, overlapping, some calling for the papers, others muttering disbelief. Luca's mask cracked. He stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think anyone will believe your petty tricks? You're nothing but a bitter woman, desperate for attention." It was then that Sophia rose. Her voice rang out, clear and strong, silencing the room. "No, Papa, it's not her tricks. I've seen the papers. I've read them, and I know they're real." The crowd froze. Luca's face drained of color. "She's not trying to destroy you," Sophia continued, her voice trembling but fierce. "She's trying to save me from becoming trapped in the same lies that once trapped her. And I will not be silent anymore." The hall erupted into chaos, voices clashing, people turning to whisper, reporters scribbling notes. Luca tried to speak, but his words drowned under the weight of the truth, and for the first time in decades, I saw fear in his eyes. That night, the town was buzzing. Some still doubted, some tried to excuse him, but the tide had shifted. No longer was I the bitter ex-wife with wild accusations. Now, the cracks in Luca's story were too wide to ignore. In the days that followed, the documents were handed over to authorities. Investigations began. Marco's family, faced with scandal, distanced themselves, and slowly, the fortress Luca had built around himself began to crumble. But the greatest victory was not his downfall. It was Sophia. One evening, she came to me not as the uncertain, trembling woman torn between loyalties, but as someone reborn. "Mama," she said softly, sitting beside me at the kitchen table. "For years, I thought I needed him. I thought I needed Marco, but I see it now. I don't need their protection. I don't need their approval. I just need the truth, and I need you." Tears blurred my vision as I took her hands. "You'll always have me." We sat there in silence, the kind of silence that feels like healing. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding her together, she was holding herself, stronger, steadier, freer, and I realized something I wished I had understood long ago. We cannot shield our children from pain by hiding the truth. Lies only wound them deeper. Only in the light, however harsh, can healing begin. Shadow would linger in our memories, but it no longer owned us. We had survived the storm, and at last, the cold that had once kept me outside my own daughter's life had begun to thaw, and in its place, warmth returned. Not the warmth of illusions, but the warmth of honesty, love, and survival.